Act 1. The Last Great Adventure. In the annals of 20th century history, few names shine as brightly as Amelia Earhart. She was more than just a pilot. She was a symbol of courage, of adventure, and of a new era for women who dare to break free from the confines of tradition. With her tousled boyish hair, her infectious grin, and an unshakable spirit, she captured the imagination of the world. She was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean, a feat that made her an international icon, America's sweetheart of the skies. But Amelia was not one to rest on her laurels. Her gaze was always fixed on the next horizon, the next impossible challenge. And in 1937, she set her sights on the biggest adventure of them all, to be the first woman to circumnavigate the globe, to fly around the world at its widest point, the equator. It was to be her last great flight, a final triumphant chapter in a legendary career. It would instead become her final, enduring mystery. The machine chosen for this monumental task was a marvel of modern engineering, a twin-engine Lockheed Model 10E Electra, financed by Purdue University. Where Earhart was a faculty member, the plane was essentially a flying laboratory, outfitted with extra fuel tanks and the most advanced navigational equipment of the day. Her navigator for this perilous journey was Fred Noonan, a man with a reputation as one of the best aerial navigators in the world, a master charting courses over the vast, featureless expanse of the ocean. Together, they were a formidable team ready to conquer the globe. Their first attempt, in March of 1937, ended in near disaster. During takeoff from Hawaii for the second leg of the journey, a tire blew, causing the Electra to ground loop and severely damaging the aircraft. It was a serious setback, but Amelia's spirit was indomitable. The plane was shipped back to California for extensive repairs. While some saw the accident as a bad omen, Amelia saw it only as a delay. 2 months later, on June 1st, 1937, they were ready to try again. This time, they would fly from west to east, a change of plans that would have fateful consequences. The initial stages of the flight were a resounding success. From Oakland, California, they flew to Miami, then down through South America, across the Atlantic to Africa, over the vast deserts of India, and across Southeast Asia. They covered over 22,000 miles, making headlines at every stop. Amelia's cheerful dispatches from exotic locales filled the newspapers. The world watched captivated as this pioneering woman and her trusted navigator conquered continent after continent. By the end of June, they had reached New Guinea, a remote outpost on the edge of the Pacific. They were exhausted but exhilarated. They had completed more than 2/3 of their epic journey. Only one major obstacle remained, the Pacific Ocean. The next leg of the journey was the most dangerous and technically demanding of the entire trip. It was a 2,556-mile flight from Lae to Howland Island, a tiny, uninhabited coral speck in the middle of the vast Pacific. Howland Island is almost impossibly small, just 1.5 miles long and half a mile wide. Finding it after flying for nearly 18 hours over a featureless ocean was a supreme navigational challenge, akin to finding a single needle in the world's largest haystack. To guide them, a U.S. Coast Guard cutter, the Itasca, was stationed just off the island, tasked with providing radio and visual signals. Everything depended on perfect navigation, perfect communication, and perfect timing. On the morning of July 2nd, 1937, under a cloudy sky, Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan took off from Lae. They climbed into the sky, turned their silver Electra eastward, and flew off into history, into legend, and into mystery. Act 2, Lost in Static. The flight from Lae to Howland Island was pushing the limits of both human endurance and 1930s technology. For nearly 18 hours, Earhart and Noonan flew through the night, a tiny silver speck against the immense blackness of the Pacific sky and sea. Their primary means of communication was a radio system that was notoriously complex and prone to problems. Their navigation depended on Fred Noonan's expert use of a sextant to take celestial readings of the stars, a task made incredibly difficult by the overcast skies they encountered. Aboard the Coast Guard cutter Itasca, stationed near Howland Island, the radio operators waited anxiously. As dawn approached on July 2nd, they began to pick up Amelia's voice. Her transmissions were sporadic, often faint, and filled with static. She reported that they believed they were close to the island, but were having trouble pinpointing its location. The Itasca's radio operators tried desperately to respond, to get a radio bearing on her signal, to guide her in, but a critical communication breakdown was occurring. The problem was a tragic misunderstanding of radio frequencies. Earhart was transmitting on a frequency that the Itasca could receive, but she apparently could not hear their return transmissions on the frequency they were using. The Itasca sent out a constant stream of Morse code signals and voice transmissions, hoping she would hear them. They even fired up their boilers to create a thick black smoke signal, a dark plume against the morning sky that should have been visible for miles. But Amelia, it seemed, could neither see nor hear them. Her radio calls became increasingly strained, her voice edged with worry. She reported, "We must be on you, but cannot see you, but gas is running low. Have been unable to reach you by radio." The men on the Itasca listened helpless, as the voice of the world's most famous female pilot grew more desperate. They could hear her, but she could not hear them. It was a one-way conversation into the void. Her final, confirmed transmission came at 8:43 a.m. Howland Island time. Her voice was high-pitched, frantic. She said, "We are on the line 157-337. We will repeat this message. We will repeat this on 6,210 kilocycles. Wait." She was referring to a navigational line of position, a line on the map that passed through Howland Island. They knew they were somewhere on that line, but they didn't know whether they were north or south of the island or how far away they were. After that transmission, there was a brief attempt to send another message, but it was cut off, and then there was only silence, a profound, unending silence that has lasted for more than 80 years. Amelia Earhart, Fred Noonan, and their silver Electra had vanished from the face of the earth. The disappearance of America's flying sweetheart triggered the largest and most expensive sea and air search in American history up to that time. The U.S. Navy and Coast Guard scoured 250,000 square miles of the Pacific Ocean. President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself authorized a massive operation. For 16 days, ships and planes crisscrossed the ocean, their crews scanning the endless blue for any sign of wreckage, any oil slick, any trace of the lost flyers. They found nothing, not a single piece of debris, not a single clue. It was as if the sky had simply swallowed them whole. On July 19th, the official search was called off. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan were declared lost at sea. But this official explanation failed to satisfy a world that was desperate for answers. The mystery had just begun, and in the absence of facts, a host of powerful and enduring theories will begin to take root. Act 3. The Crash and Sank Theory. For decades, the official and most widely accepted explanation for the disappearance of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan has been the crash and sank theory. It is the simplest, most logical, and in many ways, the most tragic of all the possibilities. This theory posits that, after failing to find Howland Island and with their fuel exhausted, Earhart and Noonan were forced to ditch their Lockheed Electra in the vast, deep waters of the Pacific Ocean. The plane, heavy with its engines and remaining fuel, would have sunk quickly, taking its two famous occupants with it to a watery grave, thousands of feet below the surface. The proponents of this theory, which include many aviation experts and historians, argue that it aligns perfectly with the known facts of the case. Earhart's final desperate radio calls clearly indicated that their fuel was running critically low. Her statement, "Gas is running low," is a powerful piece of evidence. The flight was at the absolute edge of the Electra's maximum range. Even a small navigational error, a slightly stronger headwind than anticipated, or a higher-than-planned fuel consumption rate would have been enough to seal their fate. The Pacific Ocean in that region is incredibly deep, with depths exceeding 16,000 feet. A plane sinking in such waters would be nearly impossible to find, especially with the search technology available in 1937. The theory also accounts for the complete lack of wreckage. An ocean ditching, particularly in rough seas, can be a violent event. It's possible the plane broke apart on impact, but even then, one would expect some debris, seat cushions, a life raft, and oil slick to surface. The fact that nothing was found is often explained by the sheer vastness of the search area. The search planes and ships were looking for a tiny needle in an immense haystack. A few pieces of floating debris could have easily been missed or could have drifted hundreds of miles away from the crash site before the search even began in earnest. This theory paints a picture of a heroic but ultimately tragic end. It envisions Amelia Earhart, the skilled pilot, fighting to keep her plane in the air for as long as possible, desperately scanning the horizon for a speck of land that was never there. It imagines Fred Noonan, the master navigator, frantically recalculating their position, knowing that a small error had led them to this desperate final moment. It's a story of human endeavor pushing against the unforgiving limits of nature and technology, and ultimately losing. For many, this is the most respectful and plausible conclusion. It honors Earhart's courage without resorting to sensational or conspiratorial explanations. It acknowledges the immense risk she took and accepts that sometimes, even for the greatest of heroes, the adventure ends in tragedy. The U.S. government officially supports this view, and it remains the explanation you will find in most history books. However, for a mystery this profound, a simple explanation has never been enough for everyone. The lack of a single piece of physical evidence has left the door open for other, more tantalizing, and more controversial theories to flourish. The silence from the ocean floor has allowed other voices, with other stories, to be heard. Act 4. The Gardner Island Hypothesis. While the crash and sank theory remains the official explanation, a powerful and compelling alternative has gained significant traction over the decades, championed by a dedicated group of researchers known as TIRE, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery. This is the Gardner Island Hypothesis, a theory that suggests Earhart and Noonan did not crash into the ocean, but instead managed to make a forced landing on a remote, uninhabited atoll then known as Gardner Island. Gardner Island, now called Nikumaroro, is a coral atoll located about 350 nautical miles southeast of their intended destination, Howland Island. It lies directly along the line of position 157 to 337 that Amelia mentioned in her final radio transmission. The theory posits that when they realized they had missed Howland and were running out of fuel, Earhart and Noonan turned southeast along this line, searching for any possible place to land. They would have spotted the coral reef and the shallow lagoon of Gardner Island, a tiny but viable chance for survival. The core of this hypothesis is that Earhart landed the Electra on the flat coral reef surrounding the island during low tide. The landing gear would have been sheared off, but the plane itself would have been largely intact. They were alive, but they were castaways, stranded on a desert island, hundreds of miles from any shipping lanes. But they had a radio. For several nights after the disappearance, radio operators across the Pacific, and even as far away as the United States, reported hearing faint, desperate distress calls on frequencies used by Earhart. These post-loss radio calls are a central pillar of the Gardner Island theory. The callers reported hearing a woman's voice, sometimes identifying herself as Amelia, pleading for help. The signals were weak and sporadic, consistent with damaged planes' radio being operated on low battery power, perhaps only at night when the atmospheric conditions were better. The theory suggests that Earhart and Noonan survived on the island for a period of time, perhaps days or even weeks. They would have collected rainwater, eaten fish and birds, and desperately tried to signal for help. Eventually, the incoming tides would have washed their damaged Electra off the reef and into the deep ocean, silencing their radio forever. Without a plane to signal search aircraft, they were truly lost. They eventually succumbed to injury, thirst, or starvation, their final resting place the sun-bleached coral of Forgotten Island. The evidence Tyre has compiled over years of expeditions in the Comororo is tantalizing, though not yet definitive. They have found artifacts from the 1930s that are consistent with what castaways might have left behind. Pieces of a woman's shoe of the same type Earhart wore, a jar of freckle cream from the 1930s, a sextant box of a type used by naval navigators like Noonan, and even a piece of aluminum aircraft wreckage that matches a specific type used on Earhart's Electra. Perhaps the most compelling and haunting piece of evidence is a partial human skeleton that was discovered on the island in 1940 by a British colonial officer. The bones were initially examined and dismissed as belonging to a male. Tragically, the bones themselves were later lost. However, the officer's detailed measurements of the bones survived. In recent years, modern forensic anthropologists have reanalyzed these measurements. Their conclusion is startling. The measurements are more consistent with a female of Northern European ancestry of Amelia Earhart's height and build than with any other population. The Gardner Island hypothesis paints a different, and perhaps even more heartbreaking, picture of Amelia's final days. It is not a story of a quick, tragic end in the ocean, but a prolonged, desperate struggle for survival on a desert island. It's a story of hope slowly turning to despair, of two of the world's most famous adventurers reduced to the most primal fight for life. While it remains a theory, it is a powerful one, supported by a growing body of circumstantial evidence that suggests the mystery of Amelia Earhart may not be at the bottom of the ocean, but buried in the sands of a remote Pacific atoll. Act 5. The Japanese Capture Theory, an Enduring Legend. Beyond the two leading theories, the mystery of Amelia Earhart has also given rise to a darker, more conspiratorial narrative. The Japanese Capture Theory. This theory, which gained popularity after World War II, proposes a far more sinister fate for Earhart and Noonan. It suggests that they did not crash by accident, but were on a secret mission for the U.S. government, using their round-the-world flight as a cover to conduct aerial espionage on Japanese military installations in the Pacific. According to this theory, Earhart and Noonan either strayed off course or were deliberately directed over the Marshall Islands, which were then under Japanese control and being heavily fortified in the lead-up to the war. They were then either shot down or forced to land by the Japanese military. They were captured, taken to a prison on the island of Saipan, and eventually executed as spies. Proponents of this theory point to several pieces of anecdotal evidence. Over the years, a number of supposed eyewitnesses, local islanders and former U.S. servicemen, have come forward with stories of seeing a white woman and man held captive by the Japanese in Saipan around 1937. Some have even claimed to have seen their plane hidden away. In 2017, a photograph surfaced in the U.S. National Archives file that seemed to show a white woman with a haircut similar to Earhart's and a white man who resembled Noonan on a dock in the Marshall Islands. The photo generated intense media excitement, but was later largely debunked by experts who identified it as having been taken years before Earhart's disappearance. The Japanese capture theory, while dramatic, is not supported by any hard evidence. The U.S. government has consistently denied that Earhart was on any kind of spying mission. The Japanese government has also stated that their records show no evidence of Earhart or Noonan ever being in their custody. Most mainstream historians dismiss this theory as a product of post-war paranoia and sensationalism. However, like all compelling conspiracy theories, it refuses to die, fueled by a deep-seated distrust of official narratives and the tantalizing possibility of a government cover-up. And so, the legend of Amelia Earhart endures. She is more than just a historical figure. She has become a part of our modern mythology. She represents the ultimate unsolved mystery, a story that allows us to project our own hopes, fears, and beliefs. Is she a tragic hero who met her end in the unforgiving ocean? Is she a determined castaway who fought for survival on a desert island? Or is she a patriotic spy who sacrificed her life for her country? Perhaps we will never know for sure. Perhaps her final resting place will forever remain a secret, guarded by the vast, silent expanse of the Pacific Ocean. But in a way, her disappearance has ensured her immortality. She remains forever young, forever adventurous, forever flying toward the horizon. Her story is not one of failure, but a powerful testament to the human spirit's relentless desire to explore, to discover, and to push the boundaries of what is possible. Amelia Earhart may have been lost, but she will never be forgotten.